Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be returning to the Great War at Sea series and particularly I should say, the Jutland volume, the War in the North Sea and Baltic 1914 to 1918. And the reason I'm doing this is as I progress, as always, through the to-do list. I was asked a while ago about the representation of the United States Navy in the Jutland volume and how prominent a position the United States Navy has. Now, the people who asked were understood that the US did play a bit of a minority role in terms of number of ships committed, although the importance of their role, was obviously quite significant, both practically and politically. So I was leafing through the scenario booklet, and I'm pleased to report that the US Navy does have pretty good representation, as you would expect in the later scenarios. The 6th Battle Squadron of US dreadnoughts is an integral part of the Grand Fleet in the sort of late spring, early summer 1918 and onward scenarios. And of course, the US battleships that were based as a reserve force in Ireland are also represented. And this is all great, but the only thing is that by nature of the arrangements that were agreed between Admiral Beatty and Admiral Rodman, the US Navy dreadnoughts are always an integral part of the Grand Fleet. They go where the Grand Fleet goes, and they kind of do what the Grand Fleet tells them to do. So in terms of prominence of role, it's not quite what you would want, really. They are literally just a squadron of the Grand Fleet. However, in the battle scenarios, there is one where the US Navy gets to shine, hopefully on its own. And that is the over there scenario. Now, just to give you a bit of background as to why I have these opposing ships lined up in front of my camera here. The Germans later in the war began sending nuisance raids up to try and disrupt the commerce between Britain and Norway. And one of the most successful strikes they made was when they sent the fast mine-laying cruisers Brummer and Bremser in 1917 up to attack the Norwegian convoys. And these two cruisers found a fairly weakly defended convoy with only 2 British destroyers in escort. They disposed of the destroyers with almost contemptuous ease and then proceeded to go on and rip up the convoy. Now, thereafter, reluctantly, the Grand Fleet had to accept a slight paring down of its strength so that further forces could be committed to defend this convoy route. Now, these available forces included the older battle squadrons of the Grand Fleet. Everyone took a turn doing it. And the 6th Battle Squadron, comprising the US Navy contingent, was also part of this rota. So the whole purpose of this scenario, based on an observation made by the naval I think it's Eric Holpen who made the observation that had the US Navy ships fallen in with heavy units of the High Seas Fleet and suffered heavy losses, it would have had an interesting effect on public opinion back in the United States. Either way, of course, if the US had done very well in an engagement against the Germans, then it would have strengthened the fervor for further commitment, I think. So what this scenario postulates is that the ships of the US 6th Battle Squadron are escorting a convoy to Norway, and it's their great bad luck or maybe good luck, you never know, to be the convoy that's targeted by a foray of the German 1st Scouting Group, the famous battlecruiser squadron of the High Seas Fleet. So what we have here are the 6 US dreadnoughts. I've rather randomly nominated USS Delaware to be the flag for this one. We've got North Dakota, Wyoming, Florida, New York, and Texas. And over here we have the German force led by Hindenburg. Hipper himself has come out to play. Derfflinger, Seydlitz, Moltke, and von der Tann. Now, as I say, this is a battle scenario, so the strategic map isn't used. I'm also going to use the basic combat rules of this game, and there's two reasons for this. The first is that the basic rules play much more quickly, and they tell an equally dramatic story. They craft a good narrative as you go along, without taking as long as the more involved and advanced combat rules do. The other reason is that I do have some misgivings, which I've touched on before, about the advanced combat system in this game. Now, I know that that may sound a bit negative Nelly of me, and I will just want to make clear that I do love the Great War at Sea system a lot. But by the same token, I think that certain elements of the advanced system are not very good as a representation of naval warfare. As I say, I've briefly touched on this on earlier videos, but one of my big objections to the advanced combat system is that vessel facing doesn't really have any meaning. You could be crossing another unit's T and they'll still be able to shoot at you with their full firepower factors. Now, people have house ruled this, but if you are staying true to the rules of the game as given, then it's a bit of a strange system, really. The basic combat system is faster, as I've said, and it returns equally realistic results. So just to set the scene, this interception takes place at night in clear conditions. So normally in the basic combat system, you would set the ships some distance apart to indicate that they have found each other at long range. But because it's night, the initial sighting is made at close range. And the only other thing we need to do is talk modifiers, really. At close range, all guns on the ships can be brought to bear, although to be perfectly honest, there's no point in these dreadnoughts using their tertiary armament on each other. They simply won't penetrate. So I am not actually going to bother firing any of those during the game. This is going to be a battle between the ship's primary and secondary batteries. The US, unfortunately, is a bit deficient when it comes to secondaries anyway, but hopefully they can make up for that with their weight of heavy gunpowder. Similarly, torpedo firing is an option, and every ship here has hull-mounted torpedoes, but because of the negative modifiers for firing from hull-mounted torpedo tubes in a capital ship, and the fact that this scenario takes place at night, I am not going to bother, because when you add up the negative modifiers, there is absolutely zero chance of either side scoring a hit with torpedoes. In terms of other modifiers, the US ships are regular ships for gunnery purposes, so they will be scoring hits on A6. The modifiers in the basic game are you get a +1 to your dice roll for close range, but you also get a -1 because you're firing at night. So effectively, the modifiers cancel each other out. The Germans, because they're crack gunnery crews, get an additional +1. So their environmental modifiers and their range modifiers would cancel each other out, but they benefit from the +1 for being basically Hipper's amazing first scouting group. So the turn structure is one I've covered in previous videos too, but just for a quick recap. At the start of the round, players do have the option of either opening or closing the range, but that's not going to happen in this scenario because it's been a surprise sighting. So they're just going to have one round of gunfire at each other before they try anything else. What am I going to say? Oh yes, the scenario's minimum length is set at 2 rounds of combat. And the Germans are probably going to dictate the maneuvering because they all have faster ships than the US force. So let's crack on and see how they do. So the two sides have found each other. Hipper obviously realizes he's dealing with a serious threat, but it's one he feels his veterans can deal with. Bearing in mind the huge power that is the US Navy of today was not really a thing in 1917, and the Germans, as the at least second most powerful navy in the world, at this time didn't really feel that they had all that much to fear from the US Navy. The US Navy, for their part, was ready, willing, and eager. But this scenario is set in April, May 19. 1917. So they're still quite green when it comes to the real war. Not that they're not trained, but they're new to this party. So both sides are going to be a bit conservative in how they do things. The Germans recognise that they are outnumbered, so they are going to order their ships to target the corresponding US ships. I'm just going to move these guys down a bit. The US ships being a bit slower, I'm going to assume are struggling to keep up with the German line. So normally tactical advantage is to be had by ganging up your extra ships on the lead vessel in the formation. But if the Germans manage to position themselves well, which I assume they do simply because of their speed advantage, it means the end of the US line is likely to be trailing, so it's really going to be Texas here. Now, what this means is that poor von der Tann is actually going to have a really rough time because the two most powerful dreadnoughts in the US force are going to be focusing their fire on her, so her life is not going to be very enjoyable. I have also, just to avoid clutter and for simplicity, I have drawn up stat sheets for both sides. So I will be recording the hits as we go through, and let's see how this goes down. Sorry, that was very colloquial of me, wasn't it? Right. So I'm going to do all the German ships first, simply because they have the initiative in this scenario, so it seems only polite to allow them to go first. So Hindenburg, with her primary battery of 6, is going to open fire on the Delaware, bearing in mind they need 5 or 6 to hit. And I've started very well by throwing my dice on the floor. Well done, Andrew. That was a very impressive opening salvo. So the Hindenburg has scored 2 hits with her primary weapons. Let's roll to see what she has done. So she got a 4 and a 7. Which is a secondary hit and a primary hit. That's not a bad opener. So I'm just going to mark the Delaware's damage off. Now, because the Delaware has got no secondary guns, the pain is referred to her tertiary battery. And I also, because of the expanded damage rule from primary weapons, have to roll to see whether she suffers an extra hit because the armor on her tertiaries is quite weak. The Germans roll a 4, so that is a yes. So it means in addition to having one of her primary guns shaved off, the Delaware has suffered a catastrophic hit among her tertiary weapons, which has basically either destroyed outright or knocked out all of her tertiaries. So that, not a great start, even though it doesn't impair her fighting power too greatly. Let's move over to the Derflinger, who is targeting the North Dakota. She has only scored 1 hit, much to the relief of the US crews, and that was a 5. So that's a hull hit. So, okay, not brilliant, but not terrible either. At least North Dakota's armament is intact. Seydlitz is going to bang away at Wyoming. Oof, she scores 3 hits. Seydlitz is on the ball tonight. So she gets 2 8s, a 7 and 2 8s. So that's a primary and 2 tertiaries. Ouch. And again, I roll for expanded damage on the tertiaries. Thankfully, the Germans only rolled a 1. So the poor old Wyoming, she's taken a hit to one of her main batteries, and her tertiary gun crews are really not happy. But it could have been worse, I suppose, from that number of hits. Moltke is going to train out on Florida. She scores 2 hits. This is a very good first round for the Germans. A 2 and an 8. Okay, so the 8 is a tertiary hit. I'll just roll for the expanded damage, and I'm afraid she does suffer from that. So poor USS Florida over there eats those. And unfortunately, the 2 is critical damage, so we're going to have to see what becomes of her. So the Germans got a 6. Okay, a 6 is 2 hull damage, so probably not a magazine or anything catastrophic like that, but the hit that she's landed on the Florida has clearly opened up a couple of compartments to the sea and visibly staggered the poor US dreadnought. And last but not least, von der Tann decides to avoid confusion. She is just going to target the next ship in line, which is the New York. So she's going to open fire on the New York. She gets 2 hits as well. Oof. And that's a 7 and an 8, which means the New York has suffered a primary and a tertiary hit. Let me just check expanded damage. That's 3. Okay, so the New York got off a little bit more lightly, or at least I should say her tertiary batteries got off a little bit more lightly. And luckily enough, dear old Texas, huffing and puffing at the end of the line to catch up, is being left alone for the moment. Now, before I do anything else, I'm now going to work back down the line of the German ships so that they can employ their secondary guns. Hindenburg is, well, they're all going to follow the same target. So Hindenburg's 5.9s open up on the Delaware. 1 hit. A 12. Oh my goodness, that's another critical. Now, hopefully, she'll hit somewhere heavily armored. And that's a 7. 2 secondaries. That's not so great for the poor Delaware. With no secondaries, it moves down to tertiary. Oops, no, Delaware's all the way up there. Sorry. But her tertiaries are already gone. So the pain is referred from there to her hull-mounted torpedo tubes. That could have been worse. Because the Delaware has heavy hull armor, the effect is reduced to nothing, because in order to make a critical hit effective, the gun that inflicts it has to be able to penetrate the armor, and the hull-mounted torpedo tubes are heavily armored, so the 5.9s don't penetrate. Big sigh of relief on the Delaware. Derflinger is going to open up with hers on North Dakota, and that's an 11. No, sorry, that's 2 hits, rather. Oof, dear. A 3 and a 9. So that's torpedo mount and primary. So that does no damage at all. The Germans score the hits, but the 5.9s simply don't have enough hitting power to penetrate the armor. Okay, this is good. The US is feeling a little bit happier about this. Seydlitz misses. Moltke scores 2 hits. A 9 and a 10. Let's see what happens with those. A primary and a hull hit. Again, very, very solid, well-aimed hits from Moltke, but the armor on the Florida just shrugs off the hit. And lastly, von der Tann on New York, 2 hits. Gosh, the Germans really are laying it on thick. A 4 and a 6, making that secondary battery, 2 secondary battery hits. Now, this could cause trouble. Because, of course, again, the New York has no secondaries, so the pain is referred down. Unfortunately for the New York, the German 5.9s can penetrate her tertiary guns, so Just as they were thinking they were lucky that they'd mostly survived the heavy caliber hits, it's immediately followed by a barrage of 5.9, which create absolute carnage on the New York's battery deck. But the good news for the US at least is that the German attack is now over for this turn and it's their chance to retaliate. The other good news for the US ships is damage in this game is considered to be simultaneous, so none of the hits that I've marked take effect yet. They get to wait until the US has fired back. So Delaware's guns, and indeed all the guns in the US squadron, have been training out, and they're going to roar back at the German line. Time for some payback, boys. So Delaware aims at Hindenburg and fires. She scores one hit. Good start. And that's an 11. What does that do? Oh, nice one. The Hindenburg suffers 2 hull hits and loses 1 movement point. Well, she certainly felt that. So that's an excellent first salvo from the Delaware. That has actually reduced the Germans' tactical options now, because they were a few minutes ago fairly confident in their speed advantage. Now that's something they can't count on anymore. North Dakota's going to hammer away at the Derflinger. 2 hits. Well done, cousin Jonathan. And that's a 5 and a 12, which is a very solid hit. So that hits the Derflinger in the hull and also inflicts a critical damage on her. So let's see what the US crews have done. A 3. Oh my goodness. I think they've touched off. They have touched off some sort of magazine fire in Derflinger. She has lost half of her primary gunnery factor. So I think this hit that the North Dakota just scored on her is probably equivalent to what happened to Seydlitz at the Battle of the Dogger Bank in 1915, where that one shell from HMS Lion started that magazine fire and knocked out her 2 after turrets. So yes, whatever's happened, Derflinger, despite the improved safety mechanisms on the German ships, something catastrophic has happened over there. Not sure if the US would be able to, the US sailors would be able to perceive their achievement in the dark, but if they can, hopefully there's loud cheering breaking out on the North Dakota at the site. I imagine there would be a big column of flame or something bursting out of the Derflinger. So yeah, cheer boys, cheer. So moving on to Wyoming. A very heavy battery. She's somewhat heavier than the 2 preceding US ships, but unfortunately she only scores 1 hit with it. So Seydlitz takes a single hit on one of her secondaries. Oh, well, I suppose it's better than nothing. Oh, and the US ship gets to roll for expanded damage, but they only roll a 3. So that was an extremely surgical hit on Seydlitz that just removed some of her 5.9s. What about Florida? Florida's got a nice target in the form of Moltke, and she scores 2 hits. Well done, Florida. So she gets a 7 and a 9. 2 primary hits. Good shooting, Florida. So that's given Moltke something to think about. And lastly, we get to poor old von der Tann, who is The US sailors hope, at any rate, going to be introduced to a whole world of hurt. So we'll start with USS New York. Unfortunately, the New York misses every single shot. There were a heck of a lot of ones rolled there, so they're clearly finding their feet in this one. Texas, bless you, Texas does a lot better and manages to land a hit on the German battle cruiser. So let's see what she does. Oh, and that's a critical hit. Well done, Texas. So what is an 8 when it's at home? Ooh, 2 hull. Okay. So they have struck the Von der Tann. They've not laid open any critical systems, but the Von der Tann, being the oldest ship in the squadron, has the least hull boxes on the German side, and the Texas has just torn a huge chunk out of them. So that finishes the primary battery work for the US ships. As you can see from this depressing number of zeros in the middle boxes, they don't have any secondary weapons capable of hurting the Germans, and their tertiaries, to be honest, are little more than pop guns. So nothing's going to happen there. So that was round 1. We're now going to move to round 2. And the question is, how confident are the Germans feeling? Because they have landed some damaging hits on the US ships, but a lot of the damage has been cosmetic, and they are going to have to work a bit harder. They know that they're locked into another combat round before they can consider withdrawing. But their options, it's worth them beginning to think whether it's worth breaking off and doing a runner or trying to actually defeat this US force. Now, I don't think they could really do that. Depends how much bravado they've got. At the end of the day, it's a load of battle cruisers being pitted against a load of dreadnoughts, very well designed dreadnoughts, if I might say so. And not only that, with the damage to the Hindenburg, they have lost their speed advantage, which is a bit critical. There's no option for lengthening the range because, of course, this is a night scenario. So if they went to long range, then they would lose contact. So for the moment, because they're locked in by the scenario rules to 2 rounds of combat, they're just going to keep firing while Hipper frantically works out what he's going to do. So Hindenburg opens fire on the Delaware and scores 3 hits. Okay, the Germans are keeping their pain streak going. So it's a 4, a 7, and an 8. Right, what have we got for poor old Delaware? Secondary, primary, and tertiary. Ooh, going for a bit of a hat trick there. So secondary, primary, and tertiary. Okay. So Delaware loses another primary box. Now the 2, no secondary, so it moves to tertiary, which is destroyed, which unfortunately for her means that it's then transferred onto Hull. So she has taken a bit of a battering there. And what about Derflinger? Derflinger even. Now, Derflinger, I must remember, has only got half her armament now because North Dakota really slapped her last turn. She still scores a hit on her Tormentor, and that's an 8, which means a tertiary hit. Huh. 'Tis but a scratch. But does she get expanded damage? No, she doesn't. So a rather weak bit of return fire from the Derflinger that just blows some unfortunate light gun mountings, hopefully not with their crews, overboard. But that was it. So North Dakota got off lightly from that one. What about poor old Well, I say poor old Seydlitz. She's not actually been damaged that badly. She's just had a secondary hit. So Seydlitz is going to range in on Wyoming. And misses. Okay. Oh, it's nice they're giving the Yanks a break. What about Moltke? Now, Moltke's suffered some damage to her weapons system. She's got at least one turret knocked out over there. She misses too. Okay, things are starting to look up for the US. And finally, von der Tann fighting her beleaguered battle against the New York. She does very well and scores a hit. So what have you done to New York? 7. That is a primary hit. So, okay, the New York felt that. There must be said, von der Tann's fighting a good, steady battle. And returning down the line and working back, the Hindenburg still has her secondary guns, so she's going to hit Delaware with those, scores a hit, and that's a 6. So that's secondary battery. As we know, that gets transferred down because there are no secondaries on Delaware. Gets transferred to her hull, where thankfully, due to the heavy armour, she feels nothing. 'Tis but a scratch. Derflinger is going to fire at North Dakota and misses. Seydlitz, with her reduced secondary battery, fires at Wyoming and misses. This is going well. Well, for the US it is. Moltke targets Florida and scores 2 hits. Ooh, okay, her 5.9s are still clearly on the ball. 2 7s. Oh, that's a very, very tightly bunched salvo. Unfortunately for the Germans, all of those shells land on her primary turret armor, so they just bounce off. Maybe there's a bit of a temple gong effect for the US crews manning their turrets, but they're otherwise unharmed. And lastly, von der Tann blazes away at New York, hits her, and scores a 9. What's that? Primary. No, very good shooting on the part of the Germans, but their 5.9s just cannot penetrate. To be honest, once they've knocked out the weak armor on the US tertiaries, there's really nothing their secondary guns can do. Right, so it's over to the US now, and a vengeful Delaware is going to spit back at the Hindenburg. Scores 1 hit. Good shooting. Will wear them down slowly. And that's an 8, which is a tertiary hit. So that becomes a hull hit because the tertiaries are already destroyed. No, what am I doing? She's not shooting at... Sorry. Ignore me. Silly boy. It's Delaware shooting at Hindenburg. So she does do some damage. It hits Hindenburg in the hull because, of course, she has no tertiary. So that opens a bit more of her to the sea. That's good going. What about North Dakota? You still have your full primary armament, which is nice. And she missed. Unfortunately, I was just about to say North Dakota seems to be establishing some kind of ascendancy over the Derflinger, but I spoke too soon. However, the Wyoming promises to do some damage. She's going to hit Seydlitz, and she does score a hit on her. And that's 8 for a tertiary hit. So that definitely goes through. So Seydlitz's tiny guns, which really are of no account, are wiped out in a single hit. Florida's also relatively unharmed, so she's going to blaze away with her full main battery at the Moltke. Oh my goodness, that's got to be the best salvo of the night. She has just scored, and I'm going to have to show you guys this. She has just scored 4 hits on the Moltke. Ouch, that's got to be something of a record. So what have you done to poor old Moltke? A 3, a 6. another 6 and a 10. So 3, 6, 6, 10. Torpedo, secondary, and a hull hit. Ooh, okay, that could have been worse, I suppose. Okay, so that mostly spared Moltke's upper works, but her secondary guns are completely knocked out, and so are her hull-mounted torpedoes. So that was a little bit on the brutal side. And now we get to the very scary duo of New York and Texas, who are planning to smother the poor von der Tann with fire. Now, New York has been pared back a bit. She's only got 7 dice instead of the original 9, because von der Tann, it must be said, has been doing her work well. Oh my word, talk about vengeance. New York has just scored 2 hits on the von der Tann. Nice shooting, boys. What are you about to do to Germany's oldest and weakest battlecruiser? A 3 and a 9. A primary hit and torpedo mount. Okay, so von der Tann definitely noticed that. And just to make her life even worse, the undamaged Texas is going to weigh in and try and equal her sister's feat. Very unfortunately, Texas doesn't seem to have had as good a round this time, so she scores no hits. So that is the end of the second round of combat. Let's do a bit of a status report. Damage reports, people. Let's start with the Germans. So it's not looking great. Derflinger is still definitely the weak link here in terms of the damage to her primary armament. Seydlitz is doing all right, but she's taken damage elsewhere. To be honest, the secondary and tertiary guns, and as I say, the torpedoes are of no account in this battle. The damage to Hindenburg's speed is still a critical problem. And while they're not suffering flooding damage that would worry anyone yet, the fact that the US have been blowing holes in their hulls is a cause for some concern, given that they're in the upper North Sea and quite far from their bases. On the US side, it's not been too bad. I mean, it's awful, but Texas, of course, is grinning like anything because no one's chucking any lead at them. On the US side, the only everybody has taken damage, but North Dakota and Florida can still boast their full main batteries. It's really not a good night to be someone manning the light guns on these ships because most of them are either dead, wounded, or extremely nervous by now. In terms of hull damage, I'd say, yep, Delaware and Florida have suffered the most. The others are doing okay. I think the US would be fairly confident about staying in this fight. And given the spirit they'd shown at this time, and of course the adherence to their orders, if they turn and retreat, that convoy is dead. So they're not going to run. They're going to stand their ground and they're going to face the Germans. As for the Germans, they think they can go toe to toe for another round. They're not ready to quit yet. So they are not going to quit. They're going to stay in this because I think Hipper reasonably is not expecting to bag any of the convoy now. It's not going to happen. But if he can sink a US dreadnought or maybe even cripple a couple of them, it would make such good copy for the newspapers back home where, in the spring of 1917, the news in Germany is not overly fantastic. So a significant naval victory over the US Navy would be a nice thing to be able to bring home. So he's going to do that. And with that in mind, tells his ships to stay on course as the Hindenburg fires again at the Delaware and hits her. 1 hit. So that's an 8 Tertiary. Okay, I think the Delaware's not going to be bothered, and I am right. What happens is it turns into a hull hit. So she's taking more structural damage, but it's not affecting her fighting capacity yet. So that was Hindenburg. Whoops. Derflinger's going to shoot at North Dakota. No hits. Seydlitz firing at Wyoming. Oof, 2 hits. Okay. Seydlitz is still being thoroughly professional about the whole thing. A 5 and a 6. So what have we got? A hull hit and a secondary hit on the Wyoming. The Germans do get to check for expanded damage because the secondary gets transferred to being a tertiary hit. No expanded damage. But Wyoming's secondary batteries are not very happy right now. Moltke got 4 dice available. Ooh, 2 hits. Okay. Moltke's shooting well. A 9 and an 11. Oh dear, primary 2 hull and lose 1 movement. That's a bit harsh. Okay, so not only is the Florida beginning to get rather battered, she's now become a speed 1 slow ship. What this means is the Germans have regained their speed advantage over her. That's not so good. What about von der Tann? She's going to bang away at New York. And her good streak is slipping now. She doesn't score any hits. Secondary guns, Hindenburg. No hits. Derflinger, no hits. Seydlitz on the Wyoming, no hit. Moltke's secondaries are gone. Von der Tann still has hers. And she scores a hit on the New York. Oh, it's a critical. Okay. Let's see what happens. A 7. 2 secondaries. Oh, okay. They landed a tough one there. So the 5.9s on the Von der Tann have landed an absolute blinder, which is it's basically wiped out the last of the New York's tertiary armament, really, by either destroying the guns or rendering the area they're in uninhabitable with shrapnel and other nasty things. Right, so it's back to the US, and they are thoroughly hacked off now. Delaware is going to hurl some lead at the Hindenburg and misses, unfortunately. North Dakota is going to extend the same favor to Derflinger and again misses. Oh, frustrating. Wyoming's going to try and hit Seydlitz. Ooh, and she scores 3 hits. Okay, that makes up for the quiet evening the other battleships were having. So a 2, a 9. So 2 9s and a 2. The 9s are both primary hit. 9! Sorry, that was appalling. I take it back. And very unfortunately for poor Seydlitz, the 2 is a critical hit. And she's rolled another 2. What does this mean? Oh my word. Okay. I think the Wyoming smacked Seydlitz in the magazine or something equally horrific. She suffers the loss of 6 hull, 3 primary battery squares, and she loses a movement. Yeah, that's definitely a magazine hit. You can hear my pencil scraping, wiping all these things out. Okay, well, that is worth pausing to show you because that is the state poor Seydlitz is in now. She's got barely a single turret operating. She suffered catastrophic hull damage, and not surprisingly, her speed has dropped. So she has gone from being in moderately good shape before Wyoming's last broadside to being pretty much combat ineffective. And the pain is not over because the Florida, who's a bit damaged but is still in the fight, is going to start hammering Moltke again. No hits. And now we come back to New York and Texas. So New York is going to shoot at Von der Tann first and scores one hit, which is an 8. Tertiary guns. Do the US get expanded damage? Yes, they do. So that one hit has basically cleared Von der Tann's tertiary guns. And now, just to make the poor ship's life even worse, the Texas is going to try and improve on the previous turn's shooting. And she does. She scores 2 hits on the German ship. Much better shooting this turn, Texas. So a 6 and an 8. Got secondary and tertiary. And again, we have to check for expanded damage. No, they don't get it this time, but the tertiary hit is transferred to the ship's hull, which means poor Von der Tann is flooding even more now. So we come to the end of another round, and I think the exchange of fire this time has given Hipper a bit of pause. He has inflicted more damage on the US ships, but the German squadron definitely had the worst of it this time. As you can see, Seydlitz is in a terrible state. And the others probably, if this level of battering keeps up, will not be in much better shape for long. Things are looking very slightly better for the US, but of course they have less of a dilemma than the Germans. You know, they've got a convoy to protect, so they're not going anywhere. The Germans do still have a speed advantage over the US, so on the strength of the state his squadron is in, Hipper is going to order a withdrawal. To be honest, the way this is going, he'd be a bit crazy to stay, and he's running the risk of, certainly running the risk of losing Seydlitz by now. So while the US can't keep up on account of the damage to Florida, the Germans are going to declare that they're opening the range, and the US are not able to follow them. Besides, to be perfectly honest, following a fleeing enemy squadron which is faster into the darkness and leaving a convoy behind would be poor tactical sense in terms of the orders they've been given. So, with great reluctance, because I'm sure whoever is in charge of the US force was, really looking forward to inflicting a US-style Trafalgar, it's not going to happen. They're going to keep their discipline, and the Germans are going to make a run for it. I think in terms of points awarded for the hits, it's all down to the number of boxes crossed off. The US side has a very slight advantage in points, although, to be perfectly honest, I would realistically call this tactically maybe a bit of a... in terms of damage inflicted, the severe damage done to Seydlitz does make this a US win. Aside from that, it was pretty much honours even. Tactically, it's definitely a US win because the Germans have withdrawn and not attacked the convoy. And strategically, it is a US win because the convoy has got through. And also, I suspect the damage to the German battlecruiser force will take a considerable time to repair. Seydlitz, I imagine, particularly, is going to be out of action for months. So the US Navy is a lot to crow about, although I suspect that poor old Florida is looking at a very long period of dockyard time too. She's going to need a bit of sorting out. But that was a very satisfactory action for the US ships. And to those of you guys who wanted me to play a scenario where the US Navy gets a chance to show what it can do, I hope that one fitted the bill. I really enjoyed playing it. I do play this game reasonably often. I'm afraid the time it takes to play the strategic or operational scenarios, as they call them, makes it a little bit of an occasional game rather than a regular one. So it's really nice to take the First World War era US Navy out for a spin. And it's good to be able to do something like this, where you've got a bit of excitement and night action, you've got a convoy to protect. So hope you guys enjoyed that, and thank you very much for sitting through this one. To my long-suffering veterans, as always, guys, it's really good to have your company. Thank you so much for tuning in. If there's anything you want to say about this scenario, any comments, any suggestions, if you spot any glaring errors that I made, please do say. I always welcome the corrections or just the general observations you guys make. It's really good fun to have the sort of dialogue going. If you happen to be new, if this is the first of my videos you've ever seen, a very warm welcome to you. Welcome to the channel. I hope that you've enjoyed watching this video. I'm sorry, there's been a lot of weird background noise. The penalties of doing it on the dining table, I'm afraid. Yeah, but welcome to the channel. If it's the Great War at Sea series that brought you here, I hope you'll have a look at some of the other videos I've done about this wonderful game system. Ooh, whoops, I'll stop bashing my camera stand. But if it's wargaming in general that's brought you here, please do explore. I hope you find something else that interests you. And that you'll be tempted to stay on and join the lovely community we've all built up together around this channel. And yeah, but whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as always, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.